I've written a series of 4 articles dealing with inner liberation. What exactly might be meant by inner liberation? Well, it's only one thing really. It's liberation from our thoughts and from our emotions, because those are the things that bother us. What else would you want to be liberated from? Well, maybe physical pain, but I'm assuming that you're not in physical pain. If you are in physical pain, then you're in physical pain. There's really not a lot can be done about that, although maybe a bit of a change of attitude, obviously some medication, but emotional and mental agitation is what I'm pitching at here. So there are 4 articles, so this might be a fairly lengthy podcast, and I realise that to some extent I'm pissing into the wind here, because people have been talking about this for thousands of years, and nobody, or very few people, ever seem to be able to get it, exactly what's being talked about here. So this isn't going to be some one-hit wonder. Hopefully it may send a few people off inquiring into related issues. Maybe a few people will get some insights from it. I hope so. So that's the reason I did it. I'm not under the illusion that these 4 articles will suddenly change somebody's emotional and mental state, but it may give them pointers to where they should go. So by liberation I don't mean suddenly finding yourself spaced out in some alternative reality. I just mean freedom from thoughts and emotions that perturb us. A state of what Spinoza would call blessedness, contentment. If that isn't good enough for you, then go to the charlatans selling alternative states of reality, or whatever. The first part of this 4-part series deals with understanding the emotions. So as sentient creatures, we are influenced by pretty much everything around us. We're sensitive to it. We're small objects in a world of billions of objects, many of them much larger than we are, and most of them quite capable of affecting us adversely. The small ones too. So everything from a virus through to an asteroid colliding with Earth is probably going to affect you. And things can affect us pleasurably as well. So, a good meal, loving partner, unexpected money, those things are going to affect you pleasurably. Whether we experience emotional pleasure or pain is very easy to understand. When things and events reinforce our sense of existence, we feel pleasure. When things diminish our sense of existence, we feel pain. It's that simple. It's all driven by the wish to exist, the survival instinct. And as the Buddhists would say, the cause of all suffering is the desire to exist. Very deep. Hang on to that one for the rest of your life if you don't hang on to anything else. And you will understand why the world is as it is, and why people behave in the way they behave. So this is the survival instinct, and don't underestimate this driver. It is absolutely the most potent force in your life. It determines pretty much everything. If you are going to achieve any degree of liberation from the emotions and thoughts, this is where you start. Only by understanding this driver and seeing how most of your activities in life are determined by it, will you see its awful power. You hold down a job, seek for food and shelter, a mating partner, desire approval, and a million other things just to satisfy this will to life, as Schopenhauer called it. Understanding the will to life is not a trivial thing, and actually seeing what it is and how it works can be quite disturbing. To see the awful brutality of this self-eating mechanism called life demands that a person deliberately looks where they would rather not look. Such work is best done with others, but if that isn't an option, then there are plenty of writers who can show you the nature of the beast. Swaran, Schopenhauer, Ernest Becker, to name a few. In fact, The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker is probably a good place to start. But I have some tips on how you should read those books a little bit later on, when I get to that. So anyway, if you care to seek out the real meaning of Christianity or Buddhism, you will also find an unmasking of this thing called the beast. It's necessary to do this work because only understanding can consume desire. And desires are the engine behind your emotions. Remember what I've said. When your desires are fulfilled, you're happy. When they're not when they're not fulfilled, you're unhappy. So only understanding all this stuff in detail and seeing it in yourself, not just other people, but seeing it in yourself, only understanding can consume desire. And all desires have the will to life as their root, the survival instinct. It would be the ultimate folly to try and desire to stop desiring. Only knowledge and understanding can do this, and here's a quote from Schopenhauer. Because in him knowledge has, as it were, burnt up and consumed the will, so that no will, thus no desire for individual existence remains in him any more. So he's saying very clearly there that knowledge and understanding can consume this desire, this survival instinct, if you like, the beast as I often call it. And once it has been seen and understood, it loses its power, and as he says, thus no desire for individual existence remains in such a person anymore. It looks fairly extreme, and that's because it is extreme. Very few people are going to do this work, and instead they'll settle for their unconscious suffering. Spinoza was well aware of the effort that needs to be made to do this work when he said, "How would it be possible if salvation were ready to our hand and could without great labour be found, that it should be almost by all men neglected? But all things excellent are as difficult as they are rare." And that's one of the few sort of poetical bits by Spinoza whose works are turgid and terse and difficult to understand. But he's basically saying that very few people are going to do this kind of work because it's so difficult. Anyway, so here is the first part of this work, a willingness to take the blinkers off and stare reality in the face. To understand it, to cast off all your sentimental views of life that do not hold water, to see its meaninglessness, its barbarity, that life is built on lies, and above all else, that you and I are as nothing. In fact, the big lie in life is that you and I are important. And on this planet there are 8 billion people all thinking they're important. And today 250 million of them will, no, it's not million, it's 250,000 of them will die today, having suffered from various illnesses and goodness knows what. So this is painful work. It's a stripping away, but it's absolutely necessary. Without this work you will still believe in life, still harbour the belief that somewhere there is a land of milk and honey if only you could find it. If only you could work hard enough at the secret, and if you weren't within yourself denying yourself the things that you really want. That's worth a whole podcast on its own, how the secret has managed to cause people to blame themselves for things that they are not to blame for. Anyway, it's another story. When you understand life, you will lose all hope that life itself has anything to offer. And losing hope is to simultaneously lose fear. Hope and fear are just two sides of the same coin. Conquering fear means you conquer life's grip. So peering into the eyes of the beast is a necessary first step. Once a person has done this, they can start to observe how their own emotional states vary according to how the desire for life is being satisfied. And it's no use thinking that we can have the good stuff while choosing to ignore the bad stuff. If you identify with the good stuff, you're going to be identified with the bad stuff. And the more you are identified, the greater will be your swings between pleasure and pain. Pleasure when things go well, and pain when they go badly. If you want inner peace, then both imposters, pleasure and pain, have to be seen for what they are, just the will to life playing out within you. It has no interest in you whatsoever, it's just playing out within you. As far as the will to life is concerned, it basically just wants you to survive and breed. That's about it. And then when the breeding and the rearing of your kids is done, you'll be, 50, maybe a little bit older, and then your body starts to run downhill fairly quickly. Anybody with a little bit of intelligence can see that we are built and given a lifespan that is adequate for rearing the next generation. And after that, life has very little interest in us. Anyway, here's a really important point, and I'll probably make it a few times. You have nothing within you that has the wisdom or the skill to interfere with the emotional states that arise within you. If you experience hatred, then you are experiencing hatred. If you experience uncontrollable excitement, then that is what you are experiencing. A person should never judge their emotional state. What part of you has got the wisdom or the knowledge to judge it anyway? So never ever apply judgment or try to censor your emotional states. They are the one authentic thing you have within you, your authentic response to the environment. Pretty much everything else that is going on within you is phony. Stuff you've learned from parents, religions, peers, and society at large. Oh, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. Shouldn't are just terrible words. We're full of them. In psychological terms, this is our super ego. You should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should be a good boy, you shouldn't. I was going to say something then, but anyway. So, pretty much all the stuff that's going on within you is phony, apart from your emotional responses to things, which are genuine. And yet those are the things that we try and censor. So the emotions are not calmed by judging them. They diminish in proportion as we understand them. So again, that word understanding. Understanding is important. So to summarize, all our emotional states are related to the will to life, the survival drive. Positive emotions, love, excitement, enthusiasms, and so on, come about when the will to life is satisfied. Negative emotions, envy, hatred, shame, and so on, come about when the will to life is thwarted in some way. If you really want to understand all of this, and I'm aware this is a big ask, but read part 3 of Spinoza's Ethics. It's all in there. Read The World is Will and Representation by Schopenhauer. It's all in there as well. And read The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, because a lot of it is in there as well. So it's not like this stuff is hidden. Anyway, I'll now read the second article. So the next part of this is the nature of ideas. In the previous article, so the past 15 minutes or so, I've talked about the driver of nearly all our emotional states, which is the will to life, or survival instinct. If you haven't understood that, then go back and listen to it again, or go to the blog corporealfantasy.com and read the article. Because you'll need it really to understand this, what's following really. Although many people might not suspect it, the emotions are in the body. Proof is simple enough. Just smoke a cigar, I smoke cigars. Anyway, no. Well, just smoke a joint or take a mood-enhancing drug. And, that will change your emotional state. The mind, however, processes the representations of things, the images of things, although images isn't really quite the right word. But anyway, the mind processes the representations of things, real things and concepts. I'm not going to dwell on the representation of real things bit so much, but when you look at a tree, what you actually see is your brain's simulation of a tree. Somewhat more relevant here is the way the mind builds concepts and ideas, and how most of these things are assimilated in us in an unconscious manner. We just suck it all in, particularly when we're kids. And we build ideas that are not our own, they're just ingested from the environment. So by the time we reach our late teens, we're full of ideas that have been unconsciously introjected. And many of them conflict with each other. We keep these conflicting ideas apart by buffering them, creating walls in our mind so that conflicting ideas do not see each other. Even so, there is some level of internal conflict going on. A person may have learned that it is important to work hard and strive, but at the same time they may hold the idea that life is short and they should enjoy themselves as much as possible. Conflict is inevitable, and in fact that's how most people live their lives. Many of our ideas are just plain confused, correlating poorly with reality. Someone who believes they have to please people to get approval probably doesn't notice that it might have the opposite effect. It might piss people off and cause them to see the people pleaser as weak. Anyway, many of our ideas come with associated emotions. Someone who has been bitten by a dog once will probably be frightened of a dog, or frightened of dogs, or even the mention of the word dog, for the rest of their lives. In the previous part of this podcast, I talked extensively about the will to life. Those things and activities which enhance our survival cause positive emotions, and we also build ideas associated with them. If something diminishes our survival prospects, then we experience negative emotions along with associated ideas. For the vast majority of people, these dynamics drive the creation of most of their ideas. So the idea of money, sex, food, fame, power, whatever else, will bring about an excited state with associated imagination and desires. Ideas of poverty, starvation, loneliness, poor health, death will invoke a depressed state, again with imagination and desire. The desire not to be in these states, primarily. By the late teens, most people have been fully programmed. Their ideas of what is good and bad will have been fully formed and will guide the rest of their life. Another class of ideas is similarly driven by the will to life, but is much more subtle. Mankind has always striven to create systems that alleviate existential angst. Religion, philosophical systems, esoteric beliefs, scientific dogma, and other idea systems divert the attention from the fact that death is the final outcome for all of us, and no system of ideas will prevent this. This does not mean that the work of reason is irrelevant, but let's use reason to form appropriate ideas about reality and not castles in the sky. So having laid this foundation, that most of our ideas have been unconsciously introjected, that many ideas conflict, that most of our ideas are confused, and that a large class of our ideas come with an emotional charge, it should be obvious that by the time we reach adult life, our minds resemble a pile of garbage, and that what we call our mind is not ours at all, but a program machine. For the rest of our lives, we will affirm or negate new ideas based on this programming. This is something that U.G. Krishnamurti was very big on, and it's why Gurdjieff famously said that most people are dead to any new possibilities once they reach the age of 30. They will suffer their inevitable neuroses caused by this jumble of poorly formed ideas, become sad as these neuroses wear them down, and eventually die. And as with the previous article, do not forget that the will to life is the force that causes many of our ideas to be formed. This is a conflicted process. On the one hand, we form positive ideas about the things it enhances, and negative ideas about the things it diminishes, but all the time we know deep within that the will to life serves its own purpose, namely continuation of the species, and not our purpose. So far we've seen that our emotional states are almost entirely driven by the will to live. And that is the same with the formulation of our ideas. If we are to form an objective and more realistic set of ideas, then we have to perform the painful task of seeing life as it really is. On the surface, this may seem like a recipe for unnecessary suffering, but actually the opposite is true. As our ideas become more aligned with reality, so the neuroses lessen and we acquire a certain amount of inner strength that serves us well in dealing with life's realities. Finally, I need to make a very important point in all of this. The study of the real situation man finds himself in should not be emotionally charged. As far as possible, it should be conducted as we might study any other subject. The modification of our ideas takes place in a purely intellectual way, or at least it should. Anybody who ventures out into these stormy waters needs to remember that pure ideas do not affect our emotional state. So it's almost like an academic study. You cannot study the reality of life in an emotional way. You will inevitably be affected by it, possibly depressed by it. The inevitable outcome, if we do not remember this, will be some level of depression or other negative emotional state. And again, some reading. Part 2 of the Ethics, which in my opinion, Spinoza's Ethics that is, which is, in my opinion, the most difficult part. Again, this is not light reading. You're not going to master that over a weekend. You might master it over a couple of years, but not over a weekend. And this Schopenhauer again, and Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, which is truly tortuous, and again, years worth of study. So it might be better to buy some introductory books to those particular works. But also read the Stoics. They've got some fairly good things to say about the nature of the mind and reason and so on. And so that's the way that our mind is formed as we grow. Basically just a whole pile of stuff chucked in there, and then we get into adult life and we find that we are possibly not all that happy and probably quite confused. So the next part is about just some practical stuff that we can do with the emotions. So, practices to deal with the emotions. If you haven't understood what's gone before in this, then either listen to it again or go to the website and read the articles. Reading the articles is probably a good idea because you can do it at your own pace. But anyway. So the key to the whole approach taken here is one very important idea. We need to study and work with our emotions that is as unemotional as possible. Which sounds like a contradiction, but it is possible. We're trying to work with the emotions through understanding, not by berating ourselves or getting depressed because everything looks hopeless or whatever. Our emotional nature is like a machine. When our survival is enhanced, better job, new partner, good health, whatever, we experience positive emotions. When our survival is diminished, poor health, loss of money, divorce, we experience sad emotions. It works like clockwork and is as reliable as the law of gravity. This mechanical nature of the emotions is its weakness in actual fact. If the emotions were random, we would have no way of dealing with them or understanding them. Many people interested in this line of work will read writers like Schopenhauer or Swaran, but do it with an emotional bias. These writers themselves very often fell into the trap of becoming heavily identified with the material they wrote, resulting in depression and actually for some writers even suicide. We should take Spinoza's edict that the emotional nature of man can be studied in an impartial and purely intellectual way. So when Schopenhauer points out the futility of a single life, it is quite possible to think about this in the same way as we might consider how gravity allows solar systems to form or something. I'm not saying this is easy, but it is essential if we are to study reality and remain strong and joyful within. So I quote Spinoza: "Thus the passions of hatred, anger, envy, and so on considered in themselves, follow from this same necessity and efficacy of nature. They answer to certain definite causes through which they are understood, and possess certain properties as worthy of being known as the properties of anything else, whereof the contemplation in itself affords us delight. So what he's saying there is, studying anger, envy, hatred, whatever, can actually be a pleasurable thing just because we understand them, just like you might understand how, I don't know, aeroplane engines work or something, and take some pleasure in understanding that. Anyway, he goes on to say, I shall therefore treat of the nature and strength of the emotions according to the same method as I employed heretofore in my investigations concerning God and the mind. I shall consider human actions and desires in exactly the same manner, as though I were concerned with lines, planes and solids. So Spinoza studied the emotions as he might study geometry, say. He didn't sort of whine and wail about the whole thing. He just studied it. What causes these emotions? And what he found was our emotions are just as much a part of nature as anything else, which is why we shouldn't try and censor them or criticize them. They're real. As I mentioned already in this podcast, they're one of the few real things that we've got within us. Anyway, so having established that very important principle, let's talk about practical methods to deal with the emotions. The first thing to say is that emotions are in the body, and to become more aware of the body is very important. To this end, there are various body sensing exercises, and one that comes straight out of the Gurdjieff work. This is not actually new, but is mentioned in some old Zen texts, and particularly the Zen teachings of Bodhidharma. I don't actually want to post these exercises willy-nilly. If anybody's interested, go to the website. There's an email in the about bit. Send an email and I'll send it to you. This is a pain in the arse for me. I've had people asking for it. I've sent them copies of it. So the fewer people ask for it, the better as far as I'm concerned. But it's there if anybody wants to send it. It's a couple of pages of A4, so it's reasonably detailed, and I don't want to just try and repeat the details in a podcast. Anyway, we need to become more aware of the body because this will allow us to sense the emotional state more accurately. Tension in the chest and shoulders maybe, shallow breathing and so on. So we really need to be able to sense our emotional state in the body, and by observing the thoughts we have that go along with these states. This takes quite a long time to master. Again, it isn't some weekend workshop and hey presto, you're a Reiki master. It's something rather different to that. Anyone who thinks they can master this in an afternoon is just delusional and is falling prey to a certain form of greed. This is a subtle work requiring one to master the art of self-observation. I've mentioned many times the book by Red Hawk on self-observation. If you want to get at least a sane understanding of that practice, he's very good in that book, talking about how we shouldn't judge what we see and how we shouldn't try and change what we see. Self-observation should simply register the emotional state without judgment or the desire to change things. Again, this is a skill that takes much practice. To master inner judgment is a constant feature within most people, unless they've worked to observe it. If you see inner judgment, do not judge it. And obviously there's an infinite series of things could happen there. Anyway, to summarize so far, our emotions operate in a purely mechanical way. Life-affirming events and ideas produce happy emotions, and life-negating events and ideas produce unhappy emotions. This is how we are made, and it cannot be circumvented. There is absolutely no point reading Ernest Becker's Denial of Death in an emotionally identified manner and thinking you will not become depressed. You will. Thoughts of death that are not purely intellectual will cause depression. They are life-diminishing. By becoming more attuned with your body and learning to observe your emotional states without judgment or the desire to change, You create a bit of separation between yourself and what's going on within your body and your emotions. Finally, we need understanding. This is the most important part in all of this. The first article in this series, so the very beginning of this podcast, give an overview of our emotional nature. All of it is driven by the will to life, the survival instinct. If a person is experiencing negative emotions, they can, with practice, trace it back to something diminishing their sense of existence. It's something you should try and do. Why am I feeling pissed off this morning? Oh, fuck, I've got to go to work and do all that work I don't want to do. Why don't you want to do it? Well, my boss has stood over me. Oh, well, your boss is making you feel diminished. He's actually got power over you. Yeah, that will make you feel diminished. That kind of process. So, that kind of analysis, as you become more aware of your emotional states, is really useful. So a person can say to themselves, oh, I feel diminished because I'm having problems meeting my monthly rent obligation, and this diminishes my survival prospects. It kind of sounds mechanical, and that's because it needs to be mechanical, an impartial observation. Again, this requires practice and will not be picked up in the space of an afternoon. Obviously, there is a lot more to it, but there is enough here to get a person started on an objective and purely intellectual study of the emotions. Again, I'd strongly recommend Part 3 of Spinoza's Ethics, Schopenhauer, but remember study these things as if you were studying engineering or something like that. A gentle but very good introduction to Spinoza can be got through Grossman's Spirit of Spinoza. Anyway, that's the end of that one, and the next one is on practices to deal with our minds, our thinking. So, liberating the mind sounds like something you might do one Sunday afternoon when it's raining. Not so. Anyway, hopefully you've sort of got the gist from the previous parts of this podcast. If you've not, then usual thing, go back over it if you can. So most of our thinking is actually dedicated to the act of survival. This is why we survive so well as a species. We can plan, we can innovate, we can do all kinds of things that give us an advantage over the animals. This might not seem particularly obvious, but you only have to look at where you put most of your effort to see that this is true. You get an education, some training, get a job, buy a house, find a breeding mate, do yoga or go to the gym, and 1,000 other things that simply allow you to exist in a reasonable state. Along with all of these things is a great deal of planning and thinking. That's where most of our mental energy goes to. For many people, their thinking does not go beyond these things. And there are others who are so heavily driven by the will to life, and these are the people who really suffer in life, but that's another story. But anyway, that they might accumulate great wealth, position, or power. It's like the beast has sort of run rampant within them. If our thinking was wholly dedicated to these things, there would be very little confusion. However, some people start to think about other things, such as the meaning of life, why there is suffering, why they feel miserable, and more generally what the hell this whole thing called existence is all about. So they not only end up thinking about the stuff they need to make sure their existence continues, they now have a whole universe of ideas and concepts that are used to form judgments about life. Unfortunately, many of these people will be attracted to New Age gurus, self-help gurus, religions, and anything else that might provide answers to the endless questions they have. And here is a strange twist in all of this. People who go seeking are often more confused than those who busy themselves exclusively with everyday affairs. Not only this, but the beliefs they acquire through religion, spiritual traditions, or any other organizations that they hook up with may actually be dangerous and harmful. Most of these things are full of shoulds and shouldn'ts. Those words should be banned from the English language. We shouldn't be angry. We should be loving. We shouldn't eat meat. We should eat raw vegetables, and so on. if you have taken in what has been said so far, you'll know that we're driven almost exclusively by the will to life. And actually, this will to life doesn't really understand should and shouldn't. It just wants what it wants. And so you got a formula for conflict there. What the mind thinks should be happening and what the will to life absolutely insists should happen. The key to unraveling all of this mess is very simple. Never believe that anything you think has the right to say I. Now, it's fairly deep, and I could go off into a long detour there. But we say I to ourselves all the time. And these I's vary. 1 minute it's an, oh, I'm feeling very sad, and the next minute it's, oh, I'm so happy because so-and-so's happened, or, I think this should happen. And then 10 minutes later, oh no, I don't, I think that should happen. All the time it's this I. Whatever thoughts are going through your mind at any particular moment in time, they claim the right to say I. For most of us, our days are full of voices in our heads that claim to be I, and each one of them claims to be king, if only for a few minutes. Many of these imposters will be saying should and shouldn't, with no real regard for how we actually feel. I can probably count the authors who have understood this on one hand. All other authors eventually end up saying should or shouldn't. The reason we need to understand our emotions is that we need to know what is really going on inside us, instead of some fantasy that we have constructed from reading our latest self-help book or spiritual treatise. Unless we are in touch with how we really feel, all our efforts to achieve some level of inner peace will be futile. If we have achieved some genuine and intelligent understanding of our emotions, then they will tend to bother us much less. We shouldn't offer, there we go, I actually wrote don't, so we don't offer resistance. As you may know, what we resist tends to persist. This inner letting go sounds easy, but it isn't. It may take many years and devastating self-honesty to be able to accept how we feel in many situations. I wrote about liberation from emotions first because that is where we have to start. But here is a simple exercise to help us gain a little distance from all the voices in our heads that would claim I. So sit comfortably while maintaining a straight back, relax the shoulders particularly and the muscles in the face. Close your eyes and simply try to observe the thoughts passing through your mind as they occur. This is easier said than done. Most people who try this report that when they start to observe their thoughts, the thoughts stop. And indeed, this is likely to happen. Simply persist with this exercise and eventually you will be able to observe the thoughts trickling through your mind, almost like an outside observer. Until this time, if observing your thoughts causes them to stop, then at least you at least get a respite from the constant noise in your head. Do this for at least 5 minutes and preferably 20 minutes or more. You will inevitably daydream at various points in this process. Simply go back to observing your thoughts and absolutely do not criticize yourself in any way for having lost concentration. You may eventually reach a state where the separation between thought and your internal observer takes on some kind of permanence. This allows a person to go through life with a certain equanimity. Again, it may take many years to achieve this, but the ability to see how thought obscures something within us that is thoughtless is a priceless gift. The motto of this podcast is very simple. Never believe any story that your mind is telling you, even the story that you have just heard. And there's a very important point to make at the end of this. Mr. Gurdjieff talked about the appearance of the master within a person. Many people interpret that to mean that they can, stand for 3 hours on their heads in a bucket of shit or something ridiculous like that. Not so. Master is the quietest and most insignificant voice within you. And that's the reason why you only see the master when your emotions and your thoughts are calmed, when there's not some huge internal dialogue or conflict going on within you. Master cannot materialize when you've got some kind of wild extreme party going on inside your head. Anyway, read the articles on the website if you want to understand all that stuff more, and I hope that's useful.